New revelations, though, to tell you about tonight from Edward Snowden, the former NSA contractor turned leaker, telling a Hong Kong newspaper the agency has been hacking into computers in Hong Kong and on the Chinese mainland for years. He says the NSA gains access to network backbones, the big data pipes of the internet, so it doesn't have to break into individual machines. He says he'll stay in Hong Kong to fight extradition back to the United States until, in his words, he's asked to leave, telling the paper he has faith in Hong Kong's rule of law. In the meantime, Snowden says he lives in constant fear for his and his family's safety. He says he's neither a hero nor a traitor. Now, last night in this program, New York Republican Congressman Peter King made news not by calling him a traitor, which other colleagues on both sides of the aisle have done, but for something else he said. As far as reporters who helped reveal these programs, do you believe something should happen to them? Do you believe they should be punished as well?
Actually, if they willingly knew that this was classified information, I think action should be taken, especially on something of this magnitude. I know that the whole issue of leaks has been gone into over the last month, but I think something on this magnitude, there is an obligation, both moral but also legal, I believe, against a reporter disclosing something which would so severely compromise national security. As a practical matter, I guess there have been, in the past several years, a number of reporters who have been prosecuted under it. So the answer is yes to your question.
Now, later today on Fox News, he went even further when he was talking to Megyn Kelly. He said that Glenn Greenwald, who writes for The Guardian, should be prosecuted because he threatened to reveal the identities of CIA agents and other personnel operating around the world. We've researched this. We found absolutely no evidence that Glenn Greenwald has ever said that. And in fact, we're going to talk to Glenn Greenwald right now from The Guardian. So, Glenn, Congressman King is saying you are threatening to disclose names of CIA agents and officers and other personnel around the world, and says that's a direct attack on America, and that's a reason why you should be prosecuted. I haven't found any quote where you have threatened this, and the congressman's office hasn't responded to our request for proof you actually said this. So, just for the record, have you or are you threatening to disclose the names of CIA agents and officers around the world?
Yeah, the reason you haven't found that, Anderson, is because it doesn't exist. I was really staggered that a United States congressman, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, actually could go on national television and make up an accusation, literally fabricated out of whole cloth, namely that I have threatened to uncover the names of covert CIA agents, as a way of arguing for my arrest and prosecution inside the United States for the crime of doing journalism. I mean, it's bad enough to call for that. It's extraordinarily menacing that he did so based on a complete falsehood, the idea that I ever threatened that. I did not, nor would I ever.
I'm assuming that Congressman King has sort of combined two different statements, one made by Snowden and one by you. Snowden has said, and I quote, "I had access to the full rosters of everyone working at the NSA, the entire intelligence community, and undercover assets around the world," end quote. You said in an interview, quote, "We're going to have a lot more significant revelations that have not yet been heard over the next several weeks and months." But again, that's not saying anything about what Peter King has said. So are any of the, just for the record, are any of the revelations that may be coming, that you may release, are any of them the identities of CIA personnel or agents in the field?
No, when Mr. Snowden said what it is that you quoted him as saying, he was doing so in the context of answering the accusation which I had asked him about, that he was trying to harm national security. And his point was, look, if my goal were to harm American national security or to endanger Americans, there are all kinds of things I could have done that I did not do and would never do.
Do you think King is just making that up? Do you think he's mistaken?
You know, the last thing I would try and do is read the mind of and what goes on internally in the swamp of Peter King's brain. I mean, what I do know is that he has a history of all kinds of radical and extremist statements. He himself was a supporter of terrorism for several decades when it was done by the IRA. So I don't know if he just simply decided to completely make that up or if he hallucinated. Or what, but what I do know is that the claims that he made on national television about me were utterly and completely false, and they were very serious charges that I think he ought to be held accountable for. You can't just go on national television and call for the arrest and prosecution of a journalist and tell outright falsehoods when you're doing it without consequences.
And I I should reiterate, we've contacted his office since that interview that he gave today, have not heard back. King also says that you should be prosecuted because of what you've already published, saying it puts American lives at risk. Do you believe that at all? Because, you know, I was going back and researching when WikiLeaks released huge amounts of information, The Guardian and The Times and elsewhere, a lot of people said, you know, they had blood on their hands. Julian Assange had blood on his hands. But then U.S. officials privately admitted to people in Congress and even publicly that even though the revelations were embarrassing, were a problem, that they couldn't name anyone who had really lost their lives because of it. So when people are saying you have put American lives at risk, do you believe that at all?
No, and Anderson, that point you just made, in my opinion, is really the crucial point for anybody listening to take away. Every single time the American government has things that they've done in secret exposed or revealed to the world and they're embarrassed by it, the tactic that they use is to try and scare people into believing that they have to overlook what they've done. They have to trust American officials to exercise power in the dark lest they be attacked, that their security and safety depend upon placing this value in political officials. And I really think it's the supreme obligation of every journalist and every citizen when they hear an American official say, this story about us jeopardizes national security, to demand specifics, to ask what exactly it is that has jeopardized national security. Because if you look at the stories that we reported, we were very careful to never disclose anything that could even conceivably harm national security.
The flip side of that is, I mean, what do you say to those who say, look, the government does need to be able to act in secret at certain times, that there are legitimate reasons, there are people who want to attack this country?
Yeah, nobody doubts that the government has the right to keep some secrets, and we are keeping some secrets. We're not disclosing the technical means by which the NSA spies on people to enable other countries to replicate or evade it. We're not disclosing the names of people at whom this spying has been directed. But what the government doesn't have the right to do is to implement incredibly consequential policies that affect the world in which we live and the kind of country that we are without any accountability or transparency.
Snowden told the South China Morning Post that the NSA had been hacking computers in China since 2009. He apparently showed the newspaper documents to support the claim that the paper says it couldn't independently verify them. Does that line up with what he told you, or can you say?
Yeah, he was very clear about the fact that as the U.S. goes around the world threatening and warning people about the dangers of cyber attacks, that the U.S. is actually one of the most prolific, if not the most prolific, perpetrators of offensive cyber warfare. We published the presidential directive signed in October that lays forth a very aggressive policy of when the U.S. will use offensive cyber attacks. It's particularly notable because it's China that the U.S. has directed those accusations at most, and yet the U.S., according to these documents, and according to Snowden, is very active in hacking into Chinese research facilities, university, businesses, and ones in Hong Kong as well.
Glenn Greenwald, I appreciate talking to you. Thank you.